Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Strategy Performance Scrutiny Board, Wednesday the 9th of September. We only have a couple of items on tonight's agenda and then the usual work plan at the end. Okay, substitutes and apologies for this meeting.
None received, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry, if I may, I've just received a message from Regan, from Councillor Dickinson, to say that he's struggling to get in also. So I'll send him the meeting details again.
Yeah. I wonder why everybody seems to be struggling. Have we any idea from our IT what the issue is?
No.
No. Right. Okay. Members' interests. Do any members of the board have any pecuniary or disclosable interests which may prevent them from taking part in any items on this meeting or any votes within this meeting? No. Okay. Admission to the public. There is no exempt items in this meeting. We are live on YouTube, so the public are watching already. Okay. I really wanted more councillors to be here really for this particular item, because it's quite an important item. It's regarding the electoral system that's in place at the moment, and is it actually fit for today's society, and what changes are possibly in the pipeline to be made to the electoral system. And you know, I'm pleased, it's a pleasure, it's an honour actually to have Lord David Shutt of Greetland here with us this evening to talk on this particular item, which I think, and like I said, is quite important to shape in our society, really, not just what goes on in Calderdale, but within the country. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over to Lord Shutt to discuss, for him to sort of like explain the work that's taking place currently in the House of Lords to make changes to the electoral system and to prevent things like disenfranchisement, making the system fairer and more robust, but also so it allows more people to vote and get into that system. So, Lord David Shutt, I'm going to hand over the floor to yourself and let you explain the work that's taking place. And I think Mike wants to.
Okay. Right. Okay. You've suggested that work is rather wider than what it actually was, but it does touch on something else I've been doing only yesterday. So hopefully in passing, I'll talk about that. I've no idea how long you want me to speak for. You better tell me to shut up when you've had enough. This is a sessional select committee which is created by the Liaison Committee in the House of Lords. That might be gibberish, but it's a special committee to do a specific piece of work. When it's finished, that's it. So the piece of work is post-legislative scrutiny. So in other words, you get an Act of Parliament and then selected from time to time and suggested by peers are Acts of Parliament that we need to look at again and see how they're working in practice. So the piece of legislation we're looking at is the Electoral Registration Act 2013. And the major thing about that act, there were other bits and bats, but quite frankly, the major thing was the introduction of IER, Individual Electoral Registration. In other words, it was up to every single person to make certain on the register, and it wasn't about someone called a head of household who had to fill in a form for whoever there was in that house. The committee were 12 people, and the membership in the gift of the three-party whip and the convener of the crossbenches, and it was on a 4 Labour, 4 Conservative, 2 Liberal Democrat, 2 crossbench members. One of them didn't really attend, so 11 of us, really. But 7 of us had either been former MPs or former candidates, and I worked out that between us, we'd fought 47 general elections. Goodness knows how many local government elections. We started work on the 25th of June and 2019, and our report was published on the 8th of July this year. The government is supposed to respond 2 months, within 2 months of the report being published. We waited with bated breath yesterday, but it didn't happen. And the government are notorious at delaying and delaying. However, there will eventually be a response. The first job of the committee is to agree what's known as a call for evidence. When we're setting out the sort of evidence that we're looking for people believe the act should have achieved and so forth. And we're looking for responses from electoral returning officers, campaigners, academics, political parties, the general public. We actually, in the end, got 65 responses, and of those, 30 of them were invited to be witnesses, and we had them in front of us, latterly by Zoom. But in the early days, they came to a committee room in the House. We had 2 special advisors, Stuart Huxheig and Professor Maria Saluska. We met every week that Parliament was sitting. We made 1 visit to our hamlets. We should have gone to Belfast, but that was when coronavirus was just beginning to come in, and unfortunately I had to cancel the meeting because so many peers just wouldn't get on the plane. So it was a shame, really, because it would have been very useful to have gone to Belfast. We did have a lot of interruptions. Summer recess, the conference recess, the hoax prorogation, the general election, and then we had the COVID thing. And in fact, following the general election, we sent out another second call for evidence, so that we thought there may be further evidence that came to us following that December election. So all that's a bit of a preamble, but I thought it was worth putting it in its setting about this act and our views on it. And we have something like 37 recommendations, but the report 100 and odd pages long. This is the report. Until the COVID came in, I could have sent you all a copy, but they're no longer printing these things. You've got to print them off the internet. However, I did see from your agenda papers that if you had to spare the paper, you could actually print them off and have that. So in our first consideration of that act, we considered that the change from head of household to IER was managed well throughout the country, but we were concerned that electoral returning officers had all along to get this job done, and we were uncertain as to whether they were properly resourced. And I thought there might well have been a member of the staff of the elections office, but I don't see one present, which in many ways is a shame, but I do hope that they have a copy of the report. And I just want to say this about the staff of electoral returning officers. we're usually pretty well blessed by these people. They do an incredible amount of work, and we had so many pieces of evidence from so many of them in different parts of the country. It was very clear to us that they were often under-resourced, and we just should be careful and look after them. It's now 17 years since I set foot as a councillor in Halifax Town Hall, and I can't remember in my 25-year service ever discussing the staffing and looking at the quality of that service. Perhaps it was done and I was never involved in it, but I don't recall that. But I do think it's important to be certain that that office is staffed well and we're getting all that we should get.
We had sorry, Lordship, we had a member of staff supposed to have joined us this evening. Unfortunately, she's had some IT issues right at the very end, and she's been unable to get on.
Okay. Glad to hear that anyway. Well, glad to hear that it was that. What we found in the changeover is that there's now been a lot of event registration. So in other words, because there was a general election in December, from the day to the election to the last date when you could apply to go on the register, 3.8 million people in Britain applied to join the register. Turned out that half of them were already on that register. Nevertheless, nearly 2 million people registered in that month. That puts a tremendous amount of pressure again on the election staff, who at that time are planning an election, not really registering people, and they've got the whole way about the mountain of postal votes, overseas voters, all that lot, making certain that they've got all polling stations and all the staffing and so forth. So it does mean, and it has meant under this system, they've had to look at all these. One of our recommendations is that there should be online checking. So these people that applied, the 3.85 million, if they could have done that by computer and in effect said, am I on? By computer, they could have found out that they were on. The government have not been happy about introducing such a system. However, they have that system in the Republic of Ireland. So it's quite possible to do it. And that is one of our recommendations, that there should be an online tool for registration.
Janine's now joined us, Lord Shutt, from our electoral office.
Right.
She's now managed to get on.
Ah, splendid. Good. Sorry, I've got about 6 pages and I'm just getting hold of another one. Our major concern is about accuracy and completeness of the register. In the changes that have taken place, the accuracy has tended to get better. Completeness has not. And we're very disappointed about completeness, in that it would seem to be that of those who are really entitled to vote, something like 85% are on registers. That, of course, means that 15% are not. Taken in the country as a whole, that could be between 6 and 9 million people, it's thought, that are not on registers. All sorts of reasons for that. However, we did take overseas experience. We had a Skype meeting with the electoral officer for Canada, and we find that the completeness rate there is 96%. Well, I don't see why we shouldn't be as good as Canada. In the UK, no reason at all. So a further recommendation is that the government really must see that it treats improving accuracy and completeness as a major priority in future reforms to electoral registration and administration. We then come to the point that what are electoral registers used for? Well, of course, they're used to let people have their vote, but they're also used for the list of people that do jury service. And then there's a commercial use where people use registers for credit references and so on. But there is a further element, and that is it's one of the, well, it is the building block for ward and constituency boundaries. And yesterday we had in the House of Lords the first day of the committee stage of the Parliament Constituencies Act, which is looking, in fact, to keep 650 MPs. There was an earlier plan for it to be 600. Incidentally, it is my view that that means there should be 2 constituencies in Calderdale rather than one going into Bradford. That's an aside. But again, unless the registers are right, it could well be that the fairness in terms of constituency boundaries are not right either. So that is clearly a concern. We do believe that the government should undertake to modernise the registration system further, including piloting automatic registration for attainers, that's people 16 and above, and introducing assisted registration to prompt eligible voters to register when accessing other public services. And that's a major issue. A little aside is that there are now 2 registers. There is a register where people can say, I don't want to be on the register that's open for everybody to see. I'd like to be that to be secret to me, and therefore some people are not on the full register. It's thought that that's of little purpose, and we think it ought to be abolished. We think there should be targets, and the government should set them for making certain that registers get better, and that we'd be promoting far more in schools about getting on registers and in higher education and further registration establishments. There is a change to the registration process coming in, and the canvas, where so much of the canvas isn't really needed, but there are places where it very much is needed. But there's also a very cumbersome process. If you wake up one morning and say, well, I'm not on the register, and you get in touch with the elections office and say, I'd like to be on your register, they then send you an invitation to join the register. So it's a double process. You've told them once, no, you have to fill in and accept the invitation. But we think that's far too common, and something should be done about that. So we're very much in favour of greater data sharing, and so to extend it beyond what's currently being proposed. Another issue that came up is that there is concern about election laws as a whole. The election law has not been changed for donkey's years. The Law Commission is saying this is something where some work should be done, and back the Law Commission in saying this should be looked at. There are concerns about overseas electors. I mean, the government have got a manifesto commitment to introduce overseas voting for not just people that have been overseas for 15 years, but in effect for years and years and years. And there's great difficulty, quite frankly, with overseas electors and sending out postal votes and them getting back, and something's got to be done about that. If it's right that people overseas should have votes, it's right that they should be able to exercise them properly. One of the interesting things about having a committee such as ours is that some people have got bees in the bonnet. And one of our members was very much concerned about fraud. And we've taken a fair amount of evidence on this. And overall, the incidence of fraud is very limited indeed. I don't think there's much personation. And I don't think there are that many false entries on registers. There's plenty of people missing, but I don't think there's people on that should be on, by and large. But we did look at this, and in fact, there's no doubt about it, where there is fraud, it's usually quite important and you can do something about it. And we did make one visit to Tower Hamlets, where there'd been serious fraud, and indeed the elected mayor was defrocked and a by-election held, and that something was done about it, and that was clearly important, and we heard a lot about it. We also were concerned about the postal vote and the possibility of there being fraud there, and the people who get the postal vote not being the person that makes the entry and puts the cross on, not being the person that it was addressed to. And that is perhaps a concern in certain places. Indeed, it would not surprise me if the next thing we hear on the postal vote front was that next year's elections are going to be all postal. I have no evidence for saying that, but you can see that that is a possibility. That happened some years ago when we had the foot and mouth business, and one can see that there could be a COVID election, and people trading to polling stations is not thought to be a good idea. So that's something we'll need watching for. One other thing that we did find, particularly in talking to the returning officer from Canada, was that they had something called advanced voting. That could mean that you don't need as many postal votes. So advanced vote would mean, for example, in Calderdale, that the town hall is open for 2 or 3 weeks for people to go in and vote because they couldn't make it on polling day. And the present government say they're going to bring in a bill so that people who have a postal vote have got to apply every 3 years. As it is at the moment, once you apply, you've got your postal vote until you say you don't want it. But they're now wanting to bring it in so that people have to apply every 3 years. Perhaps advanced voting would be a help, and it would reduce the number of postal votes where there is some concern about the possibility of fraud. Following on from the fraud thing, we also heard from Tower Hamlets that the whole business of the mayor being dispatched was all to do with an election petition, which was undertaken by a man called Andy Earl. And this poor chap is many, many thousands of pounds out of pocket in doing this work. And he clearly did an immense public service. And we say the government's got to do something about this, that when you get someone who has been conducting the sort of electoral fraud he was, that something should be done about this without it having to come out of one individual person's pocket. We concluded looking at voter ID. Again, it's a manifesto commitment that the government want people to take a form of identity to the polling station. Now, they did pilot this a year ago in different forms. There was some element where people were reluctant or turned up at a polling station without any form of identity, and there's an element that might put people from voting. Again, we had an enthusiast on our committee for identity cards. We didn't take a view on identity cards. We didn't think that was our business at all. We were concerned about whether this act was fit for purpose. However, if the government were to introduce identity cards, clearly that would be one way of covering the whole business of taking some form of identity to the polling station. We'd acknowledge that. But really, if they're bringing in without identity cards, we need to have a system whereby really people who generally can vote are able to vote, and it's very well known that they need to take some form of identity with them, and that's okay. So I've tried to cover in just under half an hour the major points. As I say, there are 37 points. I think our main thing is that our registers are not as complete as they should be. And we've got to do something about that, and finding ways in which people can be properly registered, I think, is an important challenge. And there's no going back, and no one said us in evidence that we should be going back to head of household. I don't think that's a possibility at all. No one's interested in that. But we've got to find a way of making certain that those who are entitled to vote can vote.
Right. Thank you, Lord. That was really interesting. And it shows that there's a lot that actually can be done to help with the reform of the voting system. I have some questions, and I'm sure some of our members will have questions as well. And Janine, if you do actually want to come in and ask some questions, please feel free to do so. I don't mind at all. But Councillor Lim, I'll go to you first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Lord Shutt, for the report. I did actually manage to read it all 120 pages of it more or less this morning, and I thought it was really, really good and really thorough. I've got a couple of questions though, if I may. The first concerns the issue about the register and about making it more complete and making sure that we can push up get the remaining 15% that aren't on the register onto it. I should say that I represent Park Ward, and I have to pay tribute to the electoral registration people here at Calderdale, because they've done some terrific work outreaching with my friend Soraya and other people, trying to really engage with people who might not otherwise be registered. So there's been some really great work on that. But I just wondered, my first question to you really is whether there are, you come up with a number of recommendations there, and including the setting of targets and so on. But I just would be interested to know whether you've got a particular favourite that you think would make a difference. And the second question relates to the topic, which I know wasn't actually originally central to the report, if I've read it correctly, which is the question of it requiring people to present photographic voter ID when they vote. And I was reading an article about elections in America, because obviously very current at the moment, where they were saying that there's at least 10% of people there who do not have any form of photographic ID. And they feel that actually disadvantages particular sections of the community. So I would just be interested in your views, just expanding a little bit more on the voter ID issue. Thank you.
Well, I think that the favourite thing is that, I very much take the view, the government's in a strange position on this, that they somehow think that, they seem to think that it should be a voluntary act to be on the register. And yet, if you've had an invitation to register and you choose not to fill the form in, you can be fined £80. Well, how can that be voluntary if that's the case? So I have to say that if it were to be entirely voluntary, I can think of many people in the commercial world who say, rather than being sat on a jury for 6 weeks on a big case, you know, I'd sooner make a lot of money instead. So I don't think it should be voluntary to be on a jury. But far more important than that is one never knows when people really want to exercise their vote. And I also tend to think that the people that are not on the register are often take more time up of the members, whether they're councillors or MPs, than those that aren't on the register. And they'll soon come running if they need help. So I don't believe personally, and there's been an argument the last time when this act, the 2013 act was done, there was an act, you know, when they looked at that, as to whether it should be voluntary or not. And they very clearly said, no, it's not a voluntary act, and indeed the fine is £80. So that was added in 2013. I mean, it may well have been the case before that, but it certainly was then. So I think we've got to use, everybody's got an assurance number. I mean, it's one of the things that you get if once you enter the world of employment. So there are certain things, applying for a passport, a driving license. There are all sorts of pieces of information that the state has, which could assist the returning officer. And indeed, there are all sorts of checks made now by returning officers when people fill in invitation. The returning officer wants to be certain that they're real people. So I would say it is the favourite is making use of all the information that there is or could be made at the disposal of the returning officer. So that's the favourite in that sense. I think that the voter ID thing, I mean, I don't think there's that many people going to polling places and lie and say I'm Jack Smith when I'm Fred Jones. I don't believe that's happened. I don't believe it's an issue. But if they want to make it so, and they've got a manifest commitment on that, I think it's very important that there are very clear four ways in which you can have your identity, and things like elderly people, things like bus passes are helpful and so forth. I think we've got to be very, very, very careful that we don't make that far too difficult. They did introduce in a couple of places where these pilots a special form that the local authority provided to people to give them an identity, and hardly any people applied for it.
Thank you. Councillor Holden?
Thank you, Chair. I think Lord might have already touched on what I was going to mention. I'd like to thank him for coming tonight. I know you must be very busy. Just going back to things like national insurance numbers and information that government holds, do you not think it's about time that the government worked a lot smarter, and not just this government, previous governments as well that have had the opportunity to work a lot smarter with the information that they've got? We seem to have very fragmented information systems, whether it's our national health numbers, our national insurance numbers. As soon as you become of age, you're issued a national insurance number. One of the two certainties in life is death and taxes. So it just seems to me that if that database was tied up with the voter registration database, it would be fairly easy to identify the ones that aren't on the register to vote, and to actually make it law that they have to be. What are your views on that?
Well, I absolutely agree that that should be the case, and that's going to be one of the arguments that we have when the government give their response. I had a rumour that the government were going to accept our report. They tend not to accept reports, or they accept, they'll say, we accept the majority of this report, but then the main items that you really want them to accept, didn't accept. We don't know, but we're having that argument. And what happens next is that the government produce their report, and then it's debated in the House. So then there's a debate, and you can bet your life that most of the people who served on the committee will take part in that debate, and also others. But they've got to respond to our report and give a view on our recommendations. I can't give any guarantees at all on how it's going to go from here on. I only hope that the majority of our and the important ones do get accepted. I think there is this issue of the voluntary nature of things, and it's strange, and I don't know whether what was agreed in 2013 and the people that took the view that they did then, whether life's going to be different in 2021, whenever it is. It's going to be a little later, I fear. I don't know, but I don't think it should be voluntary. I think it's a bit like a national insurance number and an income tax reference number. I think that it's important. It's to do with citizenry.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from members? Councillor Porritt.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lord Sharp, for joining us. I was particularly pleased to see some of the emphasis you put on the onus that's on local government for the costs and the manning of these services, and just how difficult it's been, and how the cuts to local government in recent years have put so much pressure, and the way that the government is wanting to push through reforms that they're not necessarily taking responsibility for. Yeah, just really to thank you for a really thorough piece of work, and I suppose to live in hope that the government will listen to some of the concerns regarding that undue pressure, and it's too much to ask of people. Like you said, we're relying on having good people, and we need to have good systems, because you can't always rely on having good people. And the people who work in our electoral services are some of the best of us. Seeing them there on a Saturday and a Sunday before the December election, when I walk past, just putting in the hours to make it happen, and it shouldn't be like that.
I have to say that the Association of Electoral Officers, and we must have met about 20 different electoral officers in terms of being witnesses. Across the committee, people were very, very pleased at the quality and the way in which it was clear that they were keen and did their work well. As I said at the beginning, I don't ever recall in my 25 years on Calderdale being involved in any looking at that service and see if it was staffed up properly and so forth. It seems to me that it is an area, even if next year, for example, we do have postal votes for all, which is highly possible, it's incumbent upon you good people to make certain that you are staffed sufficiently for that, because clearly there won't be polling stations to organise, but even so, getting a postal vote to everybody is a tough measure. But as I say, there really was a tremendous concern about the returning officers and the staffs and the work that they did, and people were very clear that they were doing very good work.
Thank you. Councillor Dacre and Janine, I mean, especially Janine, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this as well, what you think may be done to improve the service and the system that's in place now. I mean, this is a great opportunity for us to hear from you and what challenges you actually face as well, if any, and what we could potentially do locally to make some changes and to make it a little bit easier. So, I mean, Janine, if you'd like to, come in at this point, that would be most welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Bellinger, and thank you, Lord Shutt, for your report and for appearing tonight. I welcomed your report. I hope my connection is stable enough for you to hear me. I've got internet problems at the moment. In terms of the correctness and completeness of the registers in Calderdale, we work all year round on trying to ensure that everybody who is eligible to vote is actually registered on the register. We do a lot of work with outreach. We meet with disability groups. We work with our adult health and social care so that we can gain an access to the meetings that they hold with care providers. Definitely do regular meetings in schools. Obviously, due to the coronavirus restrictions at the moment, we're not able to do the outreach work that we have done before. We are in canvass at the moment, therefore we're engaging with every single property within Calderdale. So this year's quite interesting because the canvass has been reformed and it's a different regime where we don't have to chase absolutely everybody. So we're very busy in that respect, and I do think that the effort that the team puts in, our registers are very, very complete and very accurate because of the year-round work that we do. In terms of voter ID, if that's brought in, it depends on what the government decides it will be the way forward on that. I think one concern that we may have is we wouldn't want anybody to be turned away from a polling station. So we hope that whatever is brought in is a form of ID that is accessible to everybody. The pilots that Lord Shutt has referred to, one of the pilots used the poll card as a form of ID. So they could turn up and show the poll card, which I think pilots are really good, but I think can cause confusion because at other elections you're told that you don't need your poll card. So I think it depends on what the government is going to bring in for that. In terms of making sure that elections happen and we work round the clock, 7 days a week, often more than 30-hour days, it really is tough and intense at election times. But I think it's striking a balance as to how you could maybe have more staff involved in that, because unless you have experienced staff, it's very difficult to just have lots of staff. So, we do have to deal with lack of sleep and lack of family life at certain times of the year, but we do manage it. Next year, of course, should it go ahead, we've got the possibility of the Police and Crime Commissioner elections, the potential West Yorkshire combined mayoral election, the local elections that were postponed from May just gone, and some by-elections as well. We've also got neighbourhood planning referendums that look as though they'll be on the cards. And I think next year that the Halifax bid to the Business Improvement District, I think that might be up for renewal next year. So we've got a pretty full on year next year, pretty much wall to wall polls of some description. So yes, we've got an awful lot on, and we are meeting. We do meet regularly with the Western South Yorkshire electoral administrators to share best practice and to understand what's happening around the region. We had an Association of Electoral Administrators meeting last Friday morning, which the Cabinet Office attended and the Electoral Commission. This morning we've had a meeting with the region. So we all try to keep in touch with one another to make sure that we all keep up to date with everything. We all support one another. We all share issues that we might have, and we all find solutions. So regionally, we've got a fantastic set of electoral administrators that we all rely upon one another. So I don't know if anybody has any questions for me about anything that has been raised.
Yeah, thank you, Janine. Really appreciate that, and really appreciate the hard work that you and everybody else puts in down at the electoral office. I know when it gets to that time of year, and us members and agents are in and out constantly with huggings of paperwork for everybody. I can understand how busy it actually is. And I think you're actually best placed this evening to maybe ask for that support. I know it's difficult for us as members to get involved, but at least we might be able to speak to other officers and say, is there any chance of, some support in this area, especially next year, with all the voting that's going to be taking place on various things. But yeah, I'll open the floor up now to anybody who wants to ask Janine any questions. And Councillor Dacres, straight in.
Yeah, well, thank you. It wasn't a question, it was just a follow-on really, because you'd asked if there was anything I wanted to say. And I just wanted to say that I had my first meeting in my role as Cabinet Member for Resources earlier this week with Janine and Michelle from the department, and they are indeed extremely impressive in what they do with a very small staff. And if they had more staff, they might be able to do more outreach work. But first, I'd just say that and one of the things they said to me was about the way in which they already do share information with other government bodies, and they are always looking to try and make that more efficient and mine that data in other ways. And they're looking all the time at how they can use information from, as I say, from other public bodies. But of course, there's always a downside to that from some people's point of view, in that they see that as a breach of their privacy if information they give for one reason is being used for another. So there is that little quibble there. In terms of the fact that in theory you can be fined for not returning your forms, I think Michelle said that she never knew of anybody who had ever, any authority had ever actually gone down that route. And again, there's a question: is it really in the public interest to prosecute people for this? There's an argument to say it should be all right as a citizen not to go on to the electoral registry if you don't want to do so. And it's the same in countries where they make it compulsory to vote. It's not, again, perhaps a completely straightforward question. And the only other thing I'd say, I suppose, about registration, and it's a slightly party political point, but my feeling is that, or my impression is, I should say, that the people who are, generally speaking, least likely to be registered are the people who are economically, socially disadvantaged, because they are perhaps in homes of multiple occupation, where it's actually incredibly difficult for anybody trying to do outreach to get in to those, to even in normal times, to actually contact anybody. When you knock on the door, nobody answers the door, nobody answers any of the 6 buttons on the intercom. The accommodation is often insecure, so they move, so it's very difficult to keep track of them. People. They may be people for whom English isn't the first language, so they don't maybe understand things that are sent to them very easily. So many of the people who are not on the register are very challenging to get onto the register. And again, without further resources, I think it's really difficult for local authority electoral departments to overcome some of those hurdles.
I think there's maybe a bit of a solution here. Jean, if you can still hear us, how much work is there to do at this moment in time to the run-up of next year's elections and various things to vote on?
I hope you can still hear me. We are starting, well, we've started now planning for next year's elections. We've started a little bit early this time, purely because of coronavirus. And we're going to need to understand if the venues that we currently use, are they currently closed? Is there an intention to permanently close them? Will they be available for us to use next May? Are there any additional requirements that somebody may need from us? So we've started early. We don't usually start till about October, November. So, but we've started it a little bit early this time on our planning.
Okay, we had a meeting, our recent meeting with Jackie Addison from HR. It was mentioned in that meeting that at that particular point we had 300 members of staff that were furloughed. I don't know how many members of staff we've still got on that scheme, but is there a possibility that we could maybe utilise some of those staff to assist you at this current time? Mike, I'm gonna, I don't know, pick your brains on this one really, what your thoughts might be on this, and maybe Councillor Dacre. I mean, it's just a suggestion. If it's somewhere we can actually give you some assistance that you need, then I think it's an avenue worth exploring.
I mean, as a board chair, if you wanted to make that as a recommendation, that issue was looked into by I suppose Ian as the head of service, or Ian Hughes as the head of service, or Jackie as the head of HR and the electoral team, that would be fine. I mean, it's a suggestion that the board, if it chooses, can make, and I'm sure they'll have a look at it and respond to you, you know, either in writing or at a future meeting.
Okay, I'm happy to make that recommendation then, if the board will take a vote on that. I don't think we've ever had a recommendation before, have we, from?
I'd be happy to second that, Chair.
Right, okay. So we have a seconder on that. All those in favour of making a recommendation to Cabinet that we look at utilising furloughed staff to assist our elections team? There we go. There we go, Janine. We now have a recommendation going to Cabinet to see if we can get you some assistance.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor.
Councillor Dacre, did you want to come back in?
Well, I did. I'd hoped to actually say something before you vote. Just to say that, well, you've made the recommendation now, and Ian will have to look at it. But I was just going to caution that there are all sorts of complications involved in whether in taking the staff off furlough, and obviously you're likely to want to take them off furlough because you've got their own job is there for them to go back to, and with the staffing levels in the council having been reduced as they have over the last few years, the likelihood that another directorate will be happy to lose its staff to electoral services seems to me vanishingly unlikely, and that if those staff are coming back, they are likely to be coming back to whatever it was they were doing. But you know, there might be the odd person somewhere where they still can't come back to what they're doing. So
I think if we've still got that particular number of staff furloughed, I think it's definitely, like we say, make that recommendation for this to be explored. And that's, you know, if it's not going to work then fair enough, it's not going to work. But at least we'll put it forward for it to be actually looked into. And, you know, if there's a possibility there that we can assist, you know, the team at a time where we might be able to do that, then it's certainly worth looking into at least. And I think that's really the recommendation, is for this to be explored at this particular moment in time. Okay, do we have any more questions from members for Lord Shutt, Janine or Councillor Dacre?
If I could just come in a moment, please. I think it's very good in the report that Lord Shutt that it's been recognised the need for educating the population of democracy and its system and how to become involved in it. I think it's quite important because it's quite obvious not everybody understands the system, and I think right from school age people should be taught about how the system works and your voice in having a vote or how to become a councillor, because people just don't understand how our current system works. For example, in the run-up to a general election, we get people ringing us who've received their postal vote telling us that we haven't sent them the correct ballot paper because Theresa May or Jeremy Corbyn or Boris Johnson isn't on the ballot paper. They just don't understand how the system works, and that it's a regional or a local election for a local councillor or your MP. And so I would welcome something being, if it was brought into a national curriculum level, that people are taught about elections and democracy and how to engage with it.
That's a very fair point, is actually. Councillor Holden, you want to come in? I'm mindful of the time. We've spent an hour on this actually, and I think it's been a very useful hour. So I'll give it about another 5 minutes, then we'll actually move on to the next item, if that's okay with members. But Councillor Holden, you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I'd like to just echo those comments. I mean, I deal with a lot of people on a daily basis, some of them quite intelligent normally, but when you try and explain the election process regarding the difference between parish council, local council, MPs, the fact that councillors are not the MP for the area, the list goes on. So I think there's a massive education piece, and I think members have got a role to play in this as well. You know, we all have schools, both junior and high schools, in our own wards, and maybe we should be getting into these schools and actually chatting to the kids that are in the schools and trying to explain the differences. You know, I think there is a piece of work for members to do in all this as well.
Okay. Lord Shutt, I think on a final note, is there anything that you think we could do more locally to make these improvements?
Well, when you were talking about staffing on that front, you don't need an army of people extra in your elections office. If you've got 2 people, I suspect that your staff there will think that they've got a real bonus. You've got 2 people extra in terms of what they've got now. You know, their work, the worker register is something that's going on throughout the year. But then if those 2 people were also an extra 2 pairs of hands during the election periods, well, that really would be a tremendous bonus. So I don't think you're talking about huge numbers, by the way. That's my guess. There were 2 points I'd just like to come back on. I think Councillor Dacre was right in that there's a sense in which it's people where there's an element of deprivation that are missing. I think the young are often missing, the frequent movers, and the BAME community. These are 3 sets of groups there. But there is the other side of this coin, in that there are people in this world who want to be invisible. and they're not necessarily got a deprivation at all. And their people escape. And I think it's been put to me over the years, and those that knock on doors know about these things too, but there's only one person at the back of the door, but you, according to the register, it does seem as if there's rather more. And it's something to do with the 25% council tax discount. And I don't know what can be done about that. But that, of course, is two elements of the local authority. But that's something that might be looked at. Just one other fact, which I also mentioned, towards the end of our report, when it was quite clear that coronavirus was coming with abundance and that it was going to be very, very difficult, we were very concerned that the government had got as a proposal, they were going to use the electoral register as of December 2020 for the next set of constituency boundaries. And we had it in mind that they should use the register immediately after the last general election, because that had got the extra couple of million voters, and actually polling day register was as good as it gets. I'm told it's actually better immediately afterwards, because there were those that applied very late who then eventually get on the register, but they were too late to get on the register for the general election. So the government, to their credit, we gave them toffee for this, have actually said that the date they're going to use is the 2nd of March just past. And they reckon, and I can see this, that will be as complete a register as there is under present arrangements. As I say, our report says an electoral system fit for today, but more to be done. But on the basis of where we are now, I think that's as good as it gets. But what we want to see, that when boundaries looked at again, 10 years hence or whatever it's going to be, that we get some of these missing millions of registers, and that may make a considerable difference. Having said that, that's one element of it. The major element, of course, is that those who are entitled to vote should be able to vote, and that we should have accurate, complete registers.
Okay. Thank you, Lord Shutt. So it looks as though there is many things that can be done to make improvements here. I really appreciate your time, and it's been an honour to have you with us this evening at Calderdale Strategy and Performance Scrutiny meeting. A very interesting conversation, and I think there's quite a number of things we can take away from that. You're more than welcome to stay for this final item, which is regarding the customer service during and post COVID-19. So you're more than welcome to stay and listen into that. And I shall actually at this point move on to that item, which is item 5, customer service during and post COVID-19. And this is over to you, Sarah.
Just papers up, just bear with me. Okay, so there's a report before members this evening, which is just as requested, an update on what's been happening with customer services during COVID and our plans for dealing with if we ever get to a position where we're post-COVID. So the key points to make, I think, really are that the service have continued to deliver throughout the pandemic, and customer access has remained a priority. When all our frontline services had to close down at very short notice, as you'll remember, at middle of March, because of the spread of COVID, we were really conscious that we needed to maintain customer access so that our residents could get in touch with the council to get information and advice. The website's been a key player in making sure that up-to-date advice gets out there to all our residents and has been massively used throughout this whole pandemic. We acknowledge in the report that whilst our telephone and online chats and forms have worked incredibly well throughout the pandemic, there's always going to be need for face-to-face contact for our most vulnerable customers or those who've got very complex needs. And what we are proposing to do
is there's no plans at the moment to move the service back into Halifax Customer First, but what we are planning to do is where we're having buildings opening, so our hub libraries, for example, when we move into phase 2 of operations in the libraries, which we're hoping to do by the end of this month, then we'll have customer service advisors present within libraries to help people completing forms online or giving them general advice and support. We're also going to be having dedicated support within our partner organisations at Halifax Opportunities Trust. We'll be focusing mostly on EU settlement applications up there, because of course that's an important thing that we've got to finalise before the end of the year. But we will be able to offer other advice on other issues that might be of worry for people who are living in that area. Just produce some statistics for you that might be of interest. If I just move my paper down. So just some comparisons throughout the initial COVID period of the calls that we received, and you'll see the significant reduction in the number of telephone calls, despite the fact that we're in this pandemic period. But also a huge increase in live chat. So people have moved who previously may have come in to see us in the Customer First offices, have moved on to these other more remote channels, which we're really pleased about. We've had some fantastic feedback from customers, and there's some examples of that given in the report. We had a really great example just this week of somebody who's been supported by our early advice support team to get back on track with their council tax payments following some really difficult periods of their life where they've had issues with substance misuse, etc. And our advisors have been able to support them throughout getting through those issues and getting back to a period where they're now working and they're able to start paying back their debts. So some good feedback. I'm happy to take any questions and any comments about how we might be able to do things better, but it's back to you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate that. Just a quick one. You said that you're probably looking to have the face-to-face contact within some of the hubs, some of the library hubs. Would this actually include Halifax Central Library?
It will, yes.
Yes, good. Because I think at the end of the day, I know with regards, I don't want to say too much because obviously this meeting, not an exempt meeting, but regards certain buildings that we have within our assets and the move around. I wanted to ensure that there was still that face-to-face contact going to be there within Halifax Town Centre. And I think, you know, somewhere within the Peace Hall, that vicinity would have been fantastic because at least it brings people into the Peace Hall as well to probably access, you know, Customer First. So, Councillor Lynn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yes, and thank you for this excellent report. I think it's really well set out, both in terms of what's gone on and what's to come, really. And I just wanted to pay tribute a bit from, you know, some of my own experience recently, when I had a constituent who has had a lot of difficulties. I've been working with her on a housing claim, her attempt to get a key and move via key choice, and she needed to re-register her housing benefit to a different address. And when I contacted Customer First about how we were going to do this, because she doesn't use the internet, her English isn't brilliant, and her husband is deaf, and so on. So she had a lot of problems, and in fact what Customer First were able to do was to put on a Punjabi speaking member of staff who spoke to her and helped her out, not only with the initial presenting problem, but made sure that her daughter got her registered for a bus pass as well. So I just thought that was a little anecdote. I just wanted to say that's been my experience, because certainly in my work in Park Ward, I have a number of people who do find it, who for various reasons find it difficult to use the digital services, and who may actually also sometimes find it difficult to just kind of ring up or whatever. So I just wanted to say that I know that Customer First have been going above and beyond, and just say thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lynn. That's really great feedback to hear.
Councillor Holden and Councillor Porritt.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got to say, every time I've spoken to any of the guys on Customer First throughout this last period, they've been absolutely exemplary. You know, they're a credit to Calderdale. However, like a lot of people, I to be honest, I'd rather help myself rather than have to deal with someone on the end of the phone. Are there any moves to try and get more of the systems to a self-service point of view, where people can actually just do it via the website? You know, is there any information you can give us on the work that's being carried out on that side of things? Because I think the quicker we can get to that point, let's use taxis for an example, because the taxi drivers are a prime drain on customer first, you know, historically. Things like timescales for getting as many systems online so they can book a test through via online, rather than having to speak to someone either face to face or via the phone.
Okay. I think first of all, I would say that we wouldn't consider any of our customers a drain. That's what they're there for. But if we can make sure that we can make people able to access our services at whatever time suits them, then that's great for us as well. Initially, when we started work on the website, we were looking at high volume transactions so that we could get the biggest bang for our buck. We've done all of that now. All of that's on there. We've been looking at tweaking it to make it better, ensure that there are intuitive forms, that there are intelligent forms, and that there are maps, just to keep up with new technology and make sure it's as good as experience as possible for our residents. Because as you say, we want as many people to serve themselves as possible, because that enables us then to spend the scarce resources we've got dealing with people who've got more complex needs. The taxi online booking of MOTs and booking of appointments is absolutely something that we're working on. Yes, it's taking longer than we would like it to do, but it's certainly something that we're working on, yes. And if there are any other areas of service that you or your constituents are finding frustrating because you're not able to do it online, then just drop me a line and we'll certainly add it to our work list to look at.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Porritt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. Just thank you really for a really clear and thorough report, as Councillor Lynn said. I really just wanted to acknowledge something, just scrolling back up earlier in the report. It's a real insight actually into the complexity of the work that you've been doing, particularly recently, and the fact that your team had to were covering the phone lines 7 days a week during the initial difficult lockdown period, and really just to acknowledge and thank the team, thank the staff for all that hard work. And also I was really interested to see, like you were just referencing, the bringing in like intelligent web forms and so on, and how involved IT are in hopefully lightening the load on some of your telephone staff, so that they do have the opportunity to deal with the people who do need to speak to somebody. I was very interested in seeing that kind of innovation in work. One thing that I would just question though, and it was just, we're all talking about how working from home is going to tackle climate change, because we're not traveling to work and so on. But we've been working from home through summer, and we haven't all had our heating and all our lighting on and all of that. And I'm just picturing us all in our individual homes, heating each house for each individual member of staff. And I know it's obviously not something for you, but I think it's something for the board and for us to consider as a council, that whether we really are tackling climate change through people being in their own homes, and how we can better look at that in terms of how people are sourcing their own energy and potentially having to heat a whole home for one person being at work. And it was just something that kind of popped up in there, and it made me think about it, and I just thought it would be worth noting. But so thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for the report, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. And just to say, while I've got the opportunity, the staff within the contact centre and customer first have been absolutely fantastic throughout this. As you said, they were 7 days a week at the start of the pandemic, manning our COVID helpline. A lot of the staff that we've got are young and have young children, and have had the added complication of having children running around while they're trying to work. They've worked really flexibly, so we've moved people to be able to work later into the evening when the children have gone to bed, so answering emails and dealing with the web chats. So it's worked fantastically, but because we've got such a great set of people within that team.
Got you, George. Councillor Dacre, you want to come in at this particular point? Sorry, I've got Councillor Dacre who wanted to speak, and then I've got you down as after that, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Dacre.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I didn't mind which order it was. It was just about the heating issue raised by, and so on, heating and lighting raised by Councillor Porritt. And the council are aware of this as an issue. And I can't now remember what document it is. I've seen it in with a comment that obviously if staff are certainly going to be working at home on pretty much the same pattern as they are now, at least until the end of the year, and therefore into the colder months. And the council recognises that it cannot dictate to staff what energy providers they use, and only some energy providers are energy friendly. And so, their immediate thought on that was that their only way of dealing with that is by carbon offsetting for the additional carbon that might be created by all that home use. But then when you also look at their climate change policy, which they brought to council last week or whenever it was, in there it is talking about having discussions with staff about climate emergency. And I would anticipate that part of that discussion for staff who are working at home is going to be around how they do keep themselves warm and safe whilst they're working. And part of that will be a discussion about where does your energy come from? Have you considered changing your provider? Is there any scope for you insulating your house better? If so, can we help you find where the sources of funding for that might be? So I think the climate change policy will enable the council to try and address that with people. And people, of course, well, so yes, it's an issue, but there are some ways in which we can try to mitigate it.
If I remember rightly, going back probably about 2.5, maybe 3 years, I'm sure at some point there was a discussion about Calderdale being able to provide energy. I think this may have come from somebody within my party, I think, but I don't know if any other members can actually recall this. And if this is the case, I don't know if it's something worth exploring. And if we can do that, then provide energy to our staff. It's just a thought. Just a thought.
I think there are some councils, aren't there, who've set up energy provision companies, like I don't know whether it's Nottingham or somebody like that. There doesn't seem to have been a rush to follow their example, as far as I know. And it may be one of those things that Calderdale would struggle as being a smaller council.
Yeah.
I'll bear it in mind, and I'll ask whether we ever did consider it. And the answer was at the time.
Yeah, worth looking at. I think that. Councillor Robinson, and then I've got Councillor Lynn.
No, don't worry. It was just I was just coming in to give the point of information, but it doesn't matter. It's not.
Right, okay. Councillor.
Well, thank you, Chair. Greatly appreciate it. I'm so glad that Councillor Porritt raised that point, because it's an absolute bugbear of mine at the moment, about the whole, getting people to work from home, which is great. But if our employees and their offices and their homes are not insulated, if they haven't got smart technology, if they're not procuring energy from renewable sources, then all of the successes that the council are doing with their buildings is indeed reduced. So I'm really glad that Councillor Porritt raised that. it's something that I raised with regards to the council's office accommodation strategy. However, Councillor Dacre's answer just then gave me a bit of comfort that we're looking at this. And also, I think we need to open up the discussion. You know, we need to have a talk about what we're actually going to do to solve this problem. I am a bit concerned if we're talking about energy companies, because I did see an article the other day which a council had established an energy company, and indeed they've lost a lot of money. So I am a bit concerned about that proposal. However, there are other things that other councils are doing. For example, waste to energy is a big thing at the moment. Indeed, actually, some councils are setting up almost procurement initiatives where they're saying to their employees and also their customers, you can procure energy from these sources, and actually that's energy that's been created from the council's waste. So there's loads of exciting things, and we need to have discussion. But on to Sarah. Sarah never disappoints. Sarah, this report is fantastic. Thank you very much. My question is on productivity. Have you measured staff productivity whilst they've been at home? And if so, you know, what's that saying? That's my first question. The second question is on productivity in terms of, obviously, you get loads of issues. You get an issue that comes in, you log it, and then it's a live issue, and then it gets solved. In terms of those live issues, are they growing? And if they are growing, I suspect that they will be doing, because the council have had other issues. For example, other departments are struggling. They're over capacity at the moment, which means that customer first is under a bit of pressure. So I was just wondering what's happening about those live issues. Are they increasing? And if so, does that highlight other problems in other departments that you rely on? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. We do measure productivity, certainly on our telephony. We've got a very comprehensive performance management tool, and performance is roughly the same as it was pre-COVID. It's slightly down, and I think that's understandable given the situation that staff have been working in terms of having to work with children around them, lack of peer support to help with answering questions. So, and some of the inquiries have been a lot more complex, so they're taking a little bit longer. But we expect that by the end of this financial year, the performance will be as good, if not better, than it was last year, as people get used to things. In terms of live issues, certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, we had a reduction in the number of reports that came through, because I think people were cutting the council a bit of slack in terms of what we were dealing with. That is on the increase, I have to say. And I think I don't have the stats to hand, but it's certainly something that I'll pull together and I can share with the scrutiny panel around what are the number of reports that we've had across the various areas that we deal with, because that would be interesting information for you, I'm sure. We tend to gauge whether or not things are starting to get out of control by the number of repeat calls that we get and repeat requests where people are chasing things up, and that's really manageable at the moment. So we're not too concerned that live issues are getting beyond our control. Services are getting back to normal. Services, certainly waste is one of our biggest areas of contact, and they're now back within they've managed to catch up in terms of recycling, which was a real issue for them with everybody at home. The recycling rates went through the roof, which on one hand is fantastic, because that means we're recycling lots and lots, but on the other hand, it meant we were getting behind with collections. That's back up to date now. We're getting more bulky collection slots, and collection receptacles are now starting to go out as well. So that's reducing the number of calls that we're getting on those issues. But certainly I'll get some stats produced for you that shows a comparison of the number of the sort of standard reports that we get through based from this year against last year.
Thank you for that, Sarah. So through you, Chair. Yeah, it sounds really positive, to be honest. really well done, Sarah. I think it's a great thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Dacre, you want to come in?
Yes, just quickly to say that I don't know what it's been like on customer service in particular, but generally across the council, rates of absence are vastly lower than they were at the same period last year, sort of 30% down. So that in itself has an immediate improvement on productivity of a unit as a whole, because there's more people there working. And I know there've been a few questions about how this is going to be measured, but one thing about digital working is it enables managers to actually very easily track productivity of individual workers. Indeed, it's one of the problems with it that people feel that they can't actually escape wherever they are from being spied upon, and to use a pejorative term, but being their work rate being capable of being monitored. So I don't think we ought to have any concerns that the council cannot properly manage the staff simply because they don't happen to be sitting in the same office as them anymore.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dacre. It would be interesting as well to try and get hold of the figures of the amount of people, the footfall that came into our customer service officers for face-to-face complaints, because I should imagine there'll be a number of them who probably don't use IT and maybe not even, good on a telephone. So it'd be interesting to try and find out what those numbers are, to see if there's actually a number of people that were still missing out really from being able to get in touch with Customer First. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't want to feel that there's people that are excluded.
No, absolutely. The number of face-to-face inquiries that we were getting in Customer First has reduced year on year massively. Certainly in terms of payments, most people now pay by direct debit or online. And when universal credit was introduced, obviously there's a significant reduction there of people not coming in now for housing benefit. And then when the CAB took on the universal support role, took the contract for universal support, that's another cohort of customers that we weren't getting in to Customer First. So the numbers have reduced drastically, which is why we think, but we acknowledge absolutely that there are still some people out there who need face-to-face support, and we need to be in a position to provide that for them. So as our buildings, our civic buildings are starting to reopen, our central library and hub libraries are reopening. I think 2 open today out of our libraries, Brighouse and Todmorden open today, and 3 more next week. So once they're open, we'll be in a position to provide customer service advisors in there to support people to either use the telephone, to use our online services, or to give general advice. So we think we'll be able to help people through those routes. We're also going to be looking at, as I said, working at HOT up in Park Ward, and also working out of DWP offices with people who are in there with regards to the benefits. And if there are any other areas where you feel that we would be able to add value, they'd be more than happy to look at that, because we think working with partners in areas where customers are already going is the way we'll be able to deliver this better in the future.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's good to hear. Councillor Holden.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a very quick one, really. As a ward councillor for Ryburn, are there any plans to have Ripponden Library with a body?
Our plans at the moment are just focused around our hub and our central and hub libraries. So that's Brighouse, Todmorden, Hebden Bridge, Sorby Bridge, and King Cross. So those are the ones that we're concentrating on getting opened at the moment, because they're the ones where we'll be able to have social distancing. When we start looking at our smaller libraries, obviously the opportunity to properly social distance is very restricted. So they will be in the next round of consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. With regards complaints, Sarah, what has that level been like, especially more recently, because obviously you said at the start of COVID, people were giving us a little bit of slack. But because obviously in the report it's more of the thanks really that's in here. There's no complaints as such. I'd like to know roughly how many complaints we're getting through at the moment and what type of complaints they are, because that then gives us a rough idea as ward councillors of some of the issues that we may be facing in our ward that we're not, aware of.
So as you know, we report annually on complaints that come through about the council, and those reports are due to be going to the various scrutiny panels. I think Mike and Lauren will probably be able to tell you the dates better than me, but I think October and November are the dates that we're bringing reports around complaints for members to give consideration to. There's nothing new in them. There's no different complaints to what we would normally expect to find.
Right.
I think one of the issues that we are finding across the council is that as people are getting more and more fed up of having to deal with the implications of COVID, I think their patience is wearing a bit thin, and they're sometimes very cross with us when they get through. I think that's a polite way of saying it. So we're finding that people are a lot, not everybody absolutely, but some people are very cross about what's happening.
Which actually leads me on to what I was going to ask next. Actually, in the 3.2 is that a performance improvement plan has been put in place to provide tailored support and coaching for advisors. This will positively impact the service level target as well as ensuring the team feel looked after. I think there's probably nothing worse for a member of staff to be sat at home on their own working with Mr. or Mrs. Grumpy at the other end of the phone, giving them a barrage of grief, and then to come off that phone call and have nobody to sort of like talk to, what sort of service is there to, to support them in times like that.
That's absolutely spot on, Councillor Bellinger, and has been a real concern for us. But the managers within the service have regular contact with all of the team. They have daily briefings. They've got the opportunity to come off calls and speak with a team leader if they've had a difficult conversation. We're in the process, or our IT team are in the process of procuring new technology that will allow us to transfer calls to a team leader from people working at home. Unfortunately, we don't have that at the moment because that's what we had within the office. So that is something that we're missing, but we hope to have that procured very shortly.
Okay, that'll be good. That'll make it a little bit easier if we do have phone calls like that. Okay, I think as well, I know we can't thank everybody within the authority, but I think from the strategy and performance scrutiny board, and considering how hard your team have actually had to work throughout this period and what they've had to put up with as well, and the hours that they've actually put in, I'd be happy to send an email to yourself to be sent out to your staff on behalf of the board members as a thank you for everything they've done throughout this period. If the board's in agreement with that, I'll put something together and send it across to you.
That would be lovely and much appreciated by them, I'm sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we're done there, members, and really appreciate you coming along, Sarah, and thank you for the report. And it's good to know that everything's okay.
Thank you for your time and your ongoing interest.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Right, members, we shall finally move on to our last item, which is our work plan. Is it at this moment in time, Carol, that we no longer need to be live, or no? Is that no, we don't have to be live, or no, we still have to be live?
I've got you down and still live. I can take you off of live if you wish.
It's fine. Well, none of us are going to swear, but this is our really. I don't think members of the public are probably interested in our work plans. So
stop stream live then. Bear with me.
We should really be live because we're still in the meeting.
Right, fair enough. We'll stay live.
So I didn't mean. I don't want to get you in trouble, Paul. You see, that's why.
I would say stay live.
All right, I appreciate.
It's not much to tell you, to be honest, but I'm quite happy to do so.
Okay, right then, Lauren.
Just to say, members will be mindful that there's been a few updates recently, just in terms of shifting things around. Nothing's really come off or moved on. Following last week, we had a few of the finance items, so those have been added on as well, the revenue monitors to come later in the year. I've shared that with officers now, so they're all aware of the upcoming deadlines. I'll reshare that with members again tomorrow once I've updated it after this meeting. And just as always, if there's any additions or amends to make, just let me know. I'm more than happy to incorporate them.
Right, okay. So the next meeting we've got the Peace Hall Trust, which that will be an exempt item. And then we've got the Office 365 as well at the same particular meeting. What we could do really, if we can, is have the Office 365 as the first item on the agenda, and then the Peace Hall as the last item on the agenda, if we could, Lauren, please.
Yeah, no problem.
Chair,
Yes.
could I ask? I've just noticed on the work plan for the Peace Hall Trust meeting, we don't have any representatives from the board attending. Our own representatives from the board. Why is that? Either Councillor Swift or Councillor Baines, I believe.
Yeah.
I think they have been invited initially. We're just waiting for Nikki to confirm if Roger Marsh is able to attend, and then obviously we'll send those invites out to the board trustees as well. I
mean, as our representatives, I would expect at least one of them to be at that meeting. I think it's going to be a bit of a poor show if they don't turn up, to be fair.
Yeah.
You know, they are there representing Calderdale Council's interests on behalf of the council. So really one, both, or, you know, either of, I'm not really bothered, but I think at least one of them should actually be attending that meeting.
I've got you, Jenny. Mike, are you wanting to come in at this particular point on this?
Just to say they will be invited. That they definitely will be. There's no intention not to invite them. And in fact, the Peace Hall, Nikki would want them there as well.
Yeah. I think so. We need to ensure really that the invitation is an invitation to basically say we really do sort of like need you at this meeting. A bit of a firm stance on that one. Councillor Lynn?
Yes, just looking at the item that we've got on devolution on the 4th of November, I just wanted to make sure that we will actually get a chance perhaps to revisit a report which was done a year and a half ago now, which Mike Lodge was very involved in, looking at how Calderdale interacted with the combined authority, because I think there are some of the conclusions and the recommendations that we made there that related to how we support our members that are involved in that body, that might also relate to might be relevant to this, and would also be an opportunity for us to go to revisit those and see how many of those recommendations have actually been followed up and implemented. So I'd just like to ensure that's part of that whole discussion on November, if possible, please.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think we can possibly add it to that. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just writing down furiously.
Yeah, right, no, that's brilliant. Okay, Councillor Holden.
I'm just looking at the plan for January next year, where we've got Jackie Addison.
Sorry, Councillor Holden, just to say that's moved to March now because we freed January up for the budget and some of the finance items.
Okay, well that might actually work better because it'll give her a little bit more time. One thing I've not seen recently is the attendance figures, employee attendance figures, and attendance rates, and it's something that normally we would have had that every 6 months at this scrutiny. So I think, you know, it's worthwhile, especially given that we've got home working now, and we've already been told we've got a 30% increase in attendance. So it's worth spending a little bit of time on that, I think.
Yeah.
Can I just double check it through you, Chair, Councillor Holden, if you want that to come as part of the March report with Jackie, as a sort of like a comprehensive report, or whether you'd like it to come separately?
No, it might as well come as a comprehensive report, I think.
Right. I was just going to suggest, actually, because what we're on now, September, it's quite a way off before that meeting. If we wanted something just a briefing note even with how we are at the moment with attendance.
Yeah, briefing note would be fine, you know, in the interim.
Yeah, I suppose we could have that and then discuss it more in depth at that meeting in March. Yeah. Councillor Gallagher?
Hi, yeah, just touching upon the attendance, Rob. I'm absolutely certain that we touched upon it at the last meeting, and it was in that report. It was in the report, the attendance, the percentage of the attendance.
I might
So
have
would there be much of a difference from then until now?
I don't know. I didn't notice that we got a 30% increase in attendance, but I might be wrong. I might have overlooked it.
I didn't know whether it was a 30% one, but I do know that it was touched upon in the last report. That's all I wanted to say. Okay.
Well, we can do, we can go back through the minutes of the previous meetings anyway and have a look, see if that was in there. I know there was something that was briefly spoke about. But yeah, we can look for that. If it's there, it's there. If not, we'll ask for a briefing note. Okay. Anything else from members? No. Okay. Well, on that note then, thank you everybody. I think that's been a really interesting meeting actually this evening. Only a couple of items, but interesting stuff. So thank you everybody.